Can you hear me? Awesome. Hello everyone, my name is Landsman. I'm a systems engineering PhD student at the University of Virginia, and today I'm going to discuss the experimental paradigm of pleasant brushing and how my instrumented device investigates the measurement of contact delivery. We employ many styles of touch. Two examples are affective and discriminative touch. Affective touch refers to the type of touch that elicits emotional responses and promotes social bonding. It is typically characterized by slow and gentle stroke movements and often associated with feelings of pleasure, comfort, and pleasantness. On the other hand, discriminative touch refers to the tactile sensations that help us perceive texture, shape, and temperature. It involves the ability to detect and discriminate between different qualities and allows us to understand our physical surroundings. Studies looking to understand the physics of how people deliver affective touch focus on how we communicate emotion, soothe infants, or provide physical therapy for children with autism. An experimental paradigm of pleasant brushing is commonly used to understand how people perceive pleasantness. Brushing research investigates the somatosensory response, usually perceived pleasantness, of participants under varying brushing physics. The most prevalent work has been done with velocity. Shown here is the inverse U-shaped curve, illustrating an optimal range of brushing between 3 to 10 centimeters per second in delivery velocity. This optimizes the maximum pleasantness received by the recipient. Brushing studies primarily utilize two delivery techniques, robotic delivered and human delivered brushing. Robotic brushing allows for consistent brushstrokes under precise delivery physics, where experimenters can control for velocity and/or force. In human delivered brushing, a trained brusher delivers the brushstrokes to participants at ranges they've carefully practiced. The use of human delivered brushing creates an experimental paradigm that is more similar to naturalistic touch. In this work, I developed an instrumented device that allows for the precise measurement capabilities of robotic delivery while performing human delivered brushing. To measure real-time physics while preserving the natural quality of human delivered brushing, I constructed an instrumented brush capable of 6-axis force and position measurements. To detect when the brush is in contact with the skin, I developed a contact detection algorithm that focuses on torque. I took this further to identify when the brush is any of the 4 brushstroke stages that I will later define. The developed methodologies were implemented during a study to observe untrained pleasant brushing, where participants were the ones delivering the pleasant brushstrokes, flipping the historical experimental step of prior literature. From this case study, we found participants delivered brushing within velocity and force ranges of prior literature, and the novel inclusion of torque revealed a preliminary relationship with perceived pleasantness, notably in stability of delivery. The brush houses 2 sensors, a Nano 17 load cell that captures force and torque at 300 Hz, as well as a flock of birds position tracker that utilizes an electromagnetic field to record position and orientation of the brush at the same sampling rate. To house the sensors, I designed a 3D printed housing frame that resembles the ergonomics of a standard brush. A novel feature to note is that the brush has an interchangeable tip, allowing it to be used in many different experimental contexts. Here is a live recording of the load cell in action, measuring force and torque in X, Y, Z axes, with the magnitude of such displayed in the 4th graph for each. The inclusion of torque, the rotational equivalent of linear force, allows for measurements that are more robust to inertial noise in comparison to force. Using torque, I am able to contextualize the measurements recorded from the instrumented brush with a contact detection algorithm. This marks the beginning and end of each brushstroke delivered. The algorithm works on a per-trial basis, taking the local maxima and minima of the torque magnitude to determine thresholds of contacts and no contact. Contact endpoints are then marked using these thresholds so that analysis can be done on a stroke-by-stroke basis for each brusher. In my research, I found there were 4 visually recognizable stages of a unidirectional pleasant brushstroke. Arrival as the brush begins contact with the skin, stroke during the long period of contact with the recipient, departure as the brushstroke leaves the skin, and airtime as the brusher prepares for the next stroke. Another benefit to the measure of torque is that it allows for a brushstroke to be computationally separated into these 4 stages. Pictured is a brushstroke classified in a torque magnitude trace, as well as a 3D position view. Using the instrumented brush and the derived algorithms, I conducted a case study that flipped the standard experimental paradigm of brushing. Instead of participants receiving the brushing and rating the perceived pleasantness, we instead instructed them to deliver the pleasant brushing using the instrumented brush. This allowed for measurements of untrained pleasant brushing delivery physics with pleasantness recordings from a single recipient who received all of the brushing. Pleasantness was recorded using a visual analog scale at the end of each 30-second trial, of which there were 5 for each of the 12 participants. The preliminary study showed that participants utilizing untrained brushing had physics that aligned with prior literature, with brushing velocity falling within the range of 3 to 10 centimeters per second and brushing force in the range of 0.2 to 0.4 newtons, demonstrating that our study is representative of classic brushing methods. However, this study has an additive measure of torque in 3 dimensions that I'll explore in the next slides. Using the ratings of pleasantness from the participants where surveys were implemented, I sought to understand how 3 measures of brushing delivery, velocity, force, and torque, relate to perceived pleasantness. I began my analysis of how brushing delivery physics relate to the resulting perceived pleasantness by focusing on these 3 metrics: the historical use of velocity and force, as well as this novel inclusion of torque. Picture on the left are average metric comparisons between the most pleasant brusher in purple and the least pleasant brusher in green. These 2 brushers have significant differences in their pleasantness ratings. The participants are also significantly different in all 3 measures for velocity, force, and torque aggregates. This shows the complexity of measure interaction, requiring further work in decomposing how the components of brushing delivery interact with one another. The comparison on the right shows a new picture of how torque may relate to perceived pleasantness. The participants compared are the most pleasant brusher and the second most pleasant brusher, with a non-significant difference in perceived pleasantness from the recipient. Although their average velocity and force are significantly different, their torque is not. The tie between torque magnitude and pleasantness requires greater participant size to better understand this relationship outside of force and velocity. Taking this further, the high sampling rate of the instrumented brush allows for the comparison of torque delivery stability across a single brushstroke. Here, a representative brushstroke for the least and most pleasant brusher are shown side by side. The trace is a slice of the stroke where the y-axis is the z position of the brush as it goes on and off the stem, and the x-axis is the y location of the brush as it moves along the forearm. The coloring of the trace shows the torque magnitude at each point along the brushstroke. The least pleasant brusher has a much greater range in their delivered torque, shown by the variety of coloring along the flat side of the trace while they're in contact with the arm. Compare this variation to the stable torque delivery of the most pleasant brusher, who shows constant coloration and thus constant torque delivery. The high sampling rate of the instrumented brush allows for further research into how dynamic models of brushing may better explain perceived pleasantness in metrics such as torque. In summary, I developed an instrumented brush and contextualizing algorithms to measure the delivery of instrumented touch. The initial case study tested a flipped paradigm focusing on the observation of natural brushing physics, as well as a single perspective on pleasantness. The results provide an initial justification for the experimental force and velocity ranges of brushing delivery in prior literature. The analysis of torque reveals a preliminary relationship with perceived pleasantness in magnitude and stability of delivery. I'm excited to analyze our results from an expanded study of 21 participants with a focus on dynamic evaluations of touch. Thank you for your attention. I will invite any and all questions.